Previously on DFO Original Stories. The adventurer pursuing the remnants of Shiroko's will had arrived in the past era of Bakal's reign. There, they'd met the seven Meisters embroiled in their resistance for liberating Empyrean, and assisted them to keep history on the correct path. However, Giselle had beat it to them in arriving in the past, allowing the Gaebolg to be completed at an accelerated pace for him to make his mark on history. The adventurers and the Meisters joined forces to subjugate Gaebolg and allow history to run its intended course. But this resulted in the preordained deaths of the Meisters in this history as well. They left behind the seeds of revolution for their future generations by humbly and stalwartly turning to dust. And now, the only thing left is for those who survived to light the flames of the revolution. Leaving behind the seven Meisters who had sacrificed themselves for Empyrean, the adventurers set sail for another distorted dimension. They were headed towards the era of the Machine Revolution, during which, after being culminated for 500 years, the victory against Bakal took place. But just then, the rift abruptly became unstable, causing everyone in the group to be flung off, each in separate directions. The Eternal Flame soldiers, cast into danger, appeared before the now solo adventurer. The adventurer saved them, resulting in the leader of the Eternal Flame introducing himself while thanking them for saving his troops. His name was Juvenile, the leader of the Eternal Flame. He'd become their most notable member by understanding and recreating the blueprints of the anti-Bakal weapon left behind by the seven Meisters. Juvenile, who now believes in the adventurer's capacity, promised his trust if they saved some soldiers he'd already considered dead due to a necessary baiting tactic. And so the adventurer joined the allied forces, meeting the central figures of the resistance. Irene, commander of the Empyrean allied forces, once the leader of the Black Roses, and was then appointed as the commander of the allied forces and is now tasked with gathering the will of all Empyreans into one. Spitfire Flo, a captain who succeeded Irene in becoming the leader of the Black Roses. Alongside them, the Empyrean Allied Forces rescue mission began. The adventurer was tasked with diverting the attention of the Gold Dragon Numak, located in the northern region of Ispins, in order to extract the soldiers. During their search for Numak, the adventurer met a noblewoman, Sarah Wayne. She was acting as a spy for the Empyrean forces by agreeing to be labeled a traitor, thus feeding them intel after being accepted on the dragon's side.
奇襲、あれがヌマーグです。油断しないでください。
下船な方々が私の空間にいらっしゃったようですね。
However, Numak caught on to their plan and tried to execute Sarah and put an end to the rescue mission. But he could not withstand the forged blade that was the adventurer and thus met his demise. Despite defeating Numak and successfully rescuing the Empyrean soldiers, Sarah chose to return to Bakal's palace to continue providing intel as a spy. Promising to meet again someday, the adventurer left her behind and returned to their base. Irene greeted them upon their return. While the adventurer had been gone, Michelle Curio, who had been displaced nearby the adventurer as well, had also joined up with the Empyrean forces. Irene had been trying to summon Company Do, which was in charge of the Empyrean Allied Forces weapon supplies and the Chief of Staff of the Empyrean Allied Forces. However, contact had been lost with them ever since they entered the Forest of Death. Eventually, the adventurer set off for the Forest of Death along with Michelle on Irene's orders. After arriving, an unidentified man and woman appeared that the Empyrean Allied Forces had been looking for. Rosa Jurgen, the Chief of Staff in charge of managing all battles, reconnaissance, and supplies. Weapon dealer Oscar, in charge of supplying the Empyrean forces and also the leader of Company Daw. After successfully locating the two, they were on their way to leave the forest when Rosa, who was precisely aware about their situation, spoke that Nacer, who was the reason the forest had turned evil, must be defeated. The adventurers group headed to the middle of the Forest of Death to awaken Nacer and start their battle.
ここまで死にに来たの?
Nacer went berserk by recklessly calling upon his powers after realizing the adventurer's true strength. but was soon subdued by them, and thus a ray of light finally shined within the forest that had seemed doomed for eternal darkness. The adventurer returned successfully with Oscar and Rosa. Finally, all the central figures of the machine revolution are together, excluding Sarah Wayne. All that's left to do was to procure the anti-Bacal weapons currently under development by the Eternal Flame. However, news arrived that the Green Dragon Itronach attacked the Eternal Flame's base of operations, the Tomb of Iron. The adventurer and Juvenile planned to recover the anti-Bacal weapon, and for this, the adventurer faced Itronach to buy some time. Iris and Shiran, who had been displaced in the Tomb of Iron and was already locked in combat with Itronach, came to the adventurer's aid.
獲物が現れたな。
Itronach rained down attacks upon the adventurer, who exuded a daunting aura even at a glance. But after realizing that he would never be able to defeat the adventurer, Itronach fled. However, the anti-Bacal weapon Dragon Slayer was fired. Itronach's scales were thus pierced by the science of the Empyreans. After finishing this test run of the weapon, Juvenile successfully transferred it. With everything now prepared, Irene gave a speech to reignite the final remnants of will left in the Empyrean allied forces.
皆さん、お集まりですね。ついにこの時が来ました。長い間、500年にわたるバカルの暴政をついに終わらせる時が来たのです。さあ、見回してみてください。連合軍には本当に様々な方が参加してくださいました。貴族と平民、男性と女性、大人と子供、そしてそのどれにも属さない者すらいます。ですが、我々は天界連合軍という名のもとに一つとなって、今この場に集まっています。それは我々全員が天界人であり、我々全員に守るべき家族がいるからです。我々全員が安住の地を奪われた悲しみを知っているからです。だからこそ我々は堂々と敵陣へと歩みを進めるのです。戦場に出る者たちよ、皆さんを無事家に帰すと約束することはできません。もしかしたらここにいる多くの人々が命を落とすことになるかもしれません。留守を守る者たちよ、我々は敗れるかもしれません。多くの先祖たちが失敗してきたように、我々もまた失敗者の一人になるかもしれません。ですがお忘れなく、失敗した先祖の意志を受け継いだ我々がいるように、失敗した我々の意志を継ぐ子孫が現れるはずです。我々が目の前に広がる戦場で死ぬことはあっても、我々の心は、意志は、炎は決して消えることがありません。我々の機械で作り出した革命の火種はもう止めることなどできない。火の息を止める時が来た。
Through her speech, the forces readied their hearts one last time. All that was left was to defeat the flame dragon Ashkor, charge through the dragon's garden, and head towards Bakal's palace. The Black Roses and Empyrean allied forces had been scouting the dragon's garden, and upon encountering Ashkor, a great battle ensued.
威勢のいい奴らが来たな。手応えはありそうだけど、すぐにバテそうだな。
Ashkor was defeated by determination that burned hotter than even his flames. Dragonoid soldiers formed long ranks before the Allied forces as if waiting for them. The Empyreans also contemplated the fact that this might be their last battle. Within this dire situation, the adventurers group speculated on what Shiroko might have distorted in this timeline. But this question was soon answered. The three great dragons of Bakal were guarding Bakal's palace. These three dragons had all once impacted Ara greatly, and the fact that they were not where they should have been indicated that this distortion of history was bigger than ever. Thus, the adventurer had only one choice: to help the machine revolution succeed and return the distorted past to its normal course. The Allied forces advanced quickly with the adventurer and reclaimed Sky's Wish Gate, the entrance to the previous Empyrean palace. Although morale ran high after restoring the gate's name, the war had only just begun. To change the battle's course, they had to divide and conquer the dragons, then set up the anti-Bacal weapon. 3 squads were formed to take on the dragons: Flo and Iris for the Death Dragon Spirazzi, Juvenal and Sharan for the Ice Dragon Skaza, and Oscar and Michelle for the Berserk Dragon Hisma. The adventurer set off for the Death Dragon's Soul Palace to defeat Spirazzi first. On their way, the adventurer put to rest the not living, not dead souls of Empyreans, rendered so due to Spirazzi's influence that tried to stop them. Finally, they discovered Spirazzi. Spirazzi remained leisurely sprawled out while contaminating everything nearby with death. Upon the adventurer's arrival, Spirazzi unfurled the wings of death and flew up into the air. Spirazzi claimed that dragons had been waiting after changing up everything on Bacal's order, and that Spirazzi was curious to see whether the adventurer was someone who deserved such a plan. This confused the adventurer. Although Spirazzi kept on coming back to life to assault the adventurer, the Eternal Flame anti-Bacal weapon finally put Spirazzi to eternal rest with its everlasting flames. After defeating Spirazzi, the adventurer headed towards the next area. With the help of the Empyreans, they made it to the Ice Dragon's frozen palace. There, Sharan and Juvenal stood frozen solid, with Skaza waiting for the adventurer. Skaza proclaimed a test to see if the adventurer was worthy of knowing the truth, and thus worthy of standing before Bacal. The adventurer fell into uncertainty regarding the preparations mentioned by Spirazzi and Skaza, along with not knowing what this truth was. However, they could not remain uncertain for long. With Skaza's iciness blasting at them before their very eyes, even a split second's hesitation would be enough to freeze one whole. At the end of the vicious combat, the adventurer overcame the ice and defeated Skaza. Now only the Berserk Dragon Hisma was left. Flo radioed Oscar but received no reply. As an ominous current flowed throughout the battlefield, the adventurers' group hurried towards the Berserk Dragon's destroyed palace. What awaited the Allied forces upon their arrival was a collapsed Oscar and the defeated Berserk Dragon. Upon taking in the demolished surroundings, what had happened could be surmised. Oscar had targeted himself as the drop coordinate for the TNB anti-Bacal weapon in order to defeat Hisma. His sacrifice resulted in the Berserk Dragon's demise. Wounded grievously because of this, Oscar cheered the forces on even with his dying breath. It was then that the Allied forces understood the meaning behind his frequent chuckles and frivolous demeanor. It had all been for everyone's benefit. They did not have much time to grieve, however. The Allied forces had to put Oscar's death behind them to fulfill their ultimate goal. With all anti-Bacal weapons in place, the Allied forces reaffirmed their resolve to carry on the will of all the Empyreans that had been sacrificed. Meanwhile, Michelle and Juvenal were away from the battle, preparing for one final surprise. The adventurer closely approaches the cruel King of Dragons' palace, yet not a single dragon had blocked their path. It's as if Bacal wanted them to come to him. This arrogance once again fueled the resolve of those that were pained by countless sacrifices. Finally, they encountered Bacal, the cruel King of Dragons. Bacal was curious as to whether the forged blade that had reached him was worthy of learning the truth, and if they were capable of piercing through him. The same was true for the adventurer. They wanted to learn what the truth they had to confront was, and so wanted answers from Bacal. Thus started Bacal's test for receiving answers from one another. The adventurer did their best to withstand Bacal, but the long-standing tyrant and his might was no easy match. With help from the Allied forces' anti-Bacal weapon, the adventurer managed to persevere in battle. Amid the ongoing combat, Bacal finally acknowledged the adventurer's worthiness of the truth. And so, Bacal decides to face the adventurer as a dragon. Before testing the next level of the adventurer's limits, Bacal reveals the truth. Bakal had already met Shiroko's will long ago, and thus had not sent down his 3 dragons to Arad, which resulted in the current distortion in history. The new Genesis that Hilda had blind faith in had an enormous fallacy. It was that if Hilda had done nothing, the prophecy would have never come true. In other words, since it was Hilda, not fate, that had metastasized the apostles, all events that followed were of artifice as well. This meant that the new Genesis was created by some entity in order to veil some other purpose. Bakal concluded that the adventurer must now become a blade of firm resolve aimed at Hilda. For that to be possible, the adventurer would have to be able to pierce through himself first. By enduring Bakal's powerful flames, the adventurer proved their worth in the end. However, Bakal presented the adventurer he now deemed worthy with one last trial. All felt powerless as they beheld the might that was unleashed. Meanwhile, Juvenil, who had been away from the battle along with Michelle Curio, listened to a recording left behind by a certain person.
やっと完成した。これで本当に天界が作ったゲイボルグだって呼べそうだな。
本当にお疲れ様でした、クリオ。
オーデルズ、もしこのゲイボルグが稼働するような事態が起きたとしたら、それはきっとバカルに一発食らわせられるチャンスにもなるよな。
そうですよね。未来の人たちが何の意味もなくゲイボルグを見つけ出して稼働させたとは思えないし。
ゲイボルグの稼働はテネブの子孫だけができるようにしたけど、コードを解析するのにどれだけかかるかな。
わかりません。でもテネブの名を継いだ人ならクリオのコードをすぐにでも解除できるはずです。
そうだな。未来にはきっとものすごい天才たちが現れるはずだから。
そうです。まだまだ小さい子供ですが、結局あの子を通じて未来はずっとつながっていくのでしょうね。
そうだな。じゃあこの録音を聞いた人がバカルに一発食らわせてくれるかもしれないってことか。ああ、聞こえるか。
録音？いつから？もうそういうことは先に言ってくださいよ。何の準備もしてないのに。
自然な方がいいよな。あんまり真面目に残すのも面白くないし。聞こえるか。俺たちの選択のせいでいろいろ大変だろう。どうしても伝えたいことがあるんだ。これはテネブ一人の選択じゃない。俺たち全員の選択なんだ。つまりテネブは裏切り者じゃないってこと。それを言いたかったんだ。
それこっちにください。
おい、ちょっと背が伸びたからって反抗する気か。うわ
Realizing the truth, he reminded himself that this was no time to give in to the sudden internal chaos he felt. Piloting the Gaybold, Juvenil appeared in front of Bakal.
間に合ったみたいね。ゲイボルグ！
Juvenil took Bakal head-on no longer as a runaway, but as the greatest wildcard the Empyreans could have ever had. Thus, Bakal witnessed the full strength of the Empyreans. A satisfied smile played on his lips. Bakal then met his doom willingly, just as he had promised the adventurer long before.
さて、ヒルダを貫くね。
The war was finally over. The revolution was successful, and it was now time to mourn the dead, heal the living, and start a new journey. Just as he'd thanked the adventurer for saving him when they had first met, Juvenal thanked him again for letting him know that he was not the descendant of the treacherous Tenebe, but that of Tenebe of the Seven Meisters, thus meaning that his honor as an Empyrean was unsullied. Assuring them that he'd take care of everything that followed, he ushered them to take their leave. Afterwards, just as in the original history, he decides to entrust everything to those he had faith in and leave without leaving a trace of his name behind. And finally,
天界のために身を捧げた者たちのことは決して忘れず、二度とバカルのようなものに天界を奪われないように常に備えておくつもりです。炎となって今日を待ちわびていたすべての魂が今ここにいると信じ、今日天界が解放されたことを宣言いたします。新しい国の名は
No, your actions set her plan off course. What's changed isn't the future, the present, it's the distant future. You've planted a tiny variable in her plan. I can finally set my plan in motion. You don't know how long I've waited for this day. I'm an old man hiding the dew and waiting to guide the blade. Please, come this way. We'll wait for them there.